If I wasn't a YouTuber, I'd probably definitely be a professional pop locker. Definitely. Like, I feel like it's something I'd be like really good at. Okay. All right. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of Makeup and History. A portion of this video is also going to be sponsored by Ritual. We got our first sponsor. Yes! If you're new here, Makeup and History is a series here on my channel where I talk about a historical event, a scandal from the past, or just a person that I find absolutely fascinating. Last week, we talked about Coco Chanel, the founder of the brand Chanel, and the Nazi spy. She was a Nazi, sorry. Allegedly. Very interesting. If you haven't seen it yet, I would definitely go and check that out. Today, we're going to be talking about a story that was highly requested from a lot of you, and that is of Lorena and John Bobbitt. Dun dun dun. This one's crazy. This one is a crazy story. But before we continue, let's hear from our sponsor. Over to you, Sid. Over to you, Sid. Hello, you guys. It's me again, Cydnee, here from the past to talk to you about today's sponsor, Ritual. Just kidding. I'm not in the past. Time is an illusion. But you know what's not an illusion? Our meat bags are deteriorating. Your health is not an illusion. We need to start taking it very seriously. I know being an adult is very difficult. You have to eat right, get some sleep, pay your bills, be a good person. The list goes on and on and on and on. It never ends. Ritual at least makes it a bit easier to get some of the nutrients your body doesn't get, even with a perfect diet. Ritual is a vegan-friendly, sugar-free, non-GMO, gluten-free, and allergen-free product. It uses high-quality, bioavailable nutrient forms. The capsules are designed to delay release so that you don't get nauseous. In each capsule, there's a mix of both oily and dry nutrients together, which is really cool. And it's just really cute. Like, look at that. That's so cute. It's kind of like a snow globe, but a multivitamin. I've been taking the Ritual Women for 18 and up just to help with adulting. Like, adulting is difficult. On the site, they also have different kinds of multivitamins. So the one I take is for women. They also carry prenatal vitamins, postnatal vitamins, and vitamins for men and boys. Each subscription delivered straight to your door. Multivitamins for everybody. If you guys would like to try out Ritual, you can get 10% off your first 3 months when you use the code Cydnee at ritual.com/Cydnee. Save a little money, because that's a part of adulting too. Add that to the list of things you have to do as an adult. Do you guys remember how annoying, at least my parents were really annoying when they'd be like, stay a kid, it's more fun to stay a kid. And you're like, no, I don't want to be a kid. And now all you wish you could do is be a kid again. Yeah, so multivitamins for everybody to take care of yourself. Okay, that was a very strange ad, Sid. Good job. Let's get back into the video. If you haven't already and you would like to, please subscribe to my channel. Come on in. Turn on the notification bell so that you're notified every time I upload. All right, guys, let's put on some makeup and get into this story. As usual, all of the products and everything that I'm using will be listed down in the description box below. And for those of you who are familiar with this story, please feel free to fact check me down in the comments below, as well as include any additional information that I don't say in this video. I'm just one girl in a room putting on makeup, telling a story. I can't get it all right, but I do my best, so please politely correct me if I get something wrong. For anyone who's unfamiliar with this story, the short version is that a wife, Lorena, cuts off her husband Johnson. It's a little wordplay for you. Anyways, she cuts off her husband John's sausage and then throws it in a ditch. She claims that she did it because John, her husband, had been physically and sexually abusive to her in their marriage. I do want to do a little disclaimer that this story might be triggering for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or abuse. I will do my absolute best to be as sensitive as I can about these topics and not be too graphic, honestly, because I am very squeamish myself. But I do still want to give that disclaimer for anyone who has any sensitivities to these topics. It might be a little triggering, so proceed with caution. So the story of John and Lorena Bobbitt is unique because it involves something that many people never imagined actually happening, which is the castration of a man. I think the reason that this story is still relevant today, 30 years later, is because it highlights the battle of the sexes. Many men demonize Lorena for committing such an unthinkable act, and many women revered Lorena for defending herself and doing something that every man could really feel.
The symbolic power of that act remains to this day frightening and alive.
Like, there wasn't a single guy who heard about this story and wasn't like terrified, you know? They were very scared.
I tell my friends, make sure you're sleeping on your belly if you had an argument with your wife. I think that's not a bad thing to do.
Before deciding to make this video, there are a lot of details about this story that I was not aware of, so I was shocked. If you've never heard this story before, buckle up. It's insane. All right, so let's get to know the main characters of this story, starting with John. On March 23rd, 1967, John Wayne Bobbitt was born in Niagara Falls, New York. John's mother was a drug addict, and John's father was not in his life at all. John describes his mother as being a really nice woman who did her best to take care of John and his two brothers, but she was unable to because she was addicted to drugs. So at the age of 3, John and his two older brothers were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. John describes his childhood as being very big. There was a big, loving family. His aunt and uncle had 3 kids before they adopted John and his siblings, so there were 6 boys in total, and they all referred to themselves as brothers. Even though they were cousins, they called themselves brothers. Growing up, John says that he was a very tough child. He said he never cried, and as he grew older, his nickname became Johnny Barbell. Barbell. I'm assuming like barbell, like lifting weights? I don't know. He says he always strived to be the very best at everything. He was very competitive. He played a lot of sports, and he was in overall really great physical condition. Now, it's unclear exactly when, but at some point as a young adult, John decided that he wanted to join the Marine Corps. And in 1988, he attended the Marine Corps Ball, which is where he met Lorena. Okay, so now we have to get in our time machine and go back in time to meet Lorena. We also have to go to Ecuador, so put your seatbelt on. You better be putting that seatbelt on. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding around. All right. We're here. We're in 1970 and we're in Ecuador. Sorry, I'm not going to continue doing that the whole video, I promise. All right, so October 31st, 1970, Lorena Bobbitt is born in Buque, Ecuador. You heard that right. She was born on Spooky Day. I don't know if that's relevant or not. Probably is. Anywho, Lorena and her family moved from Ecuador to Venezuela, and in Venezuela is where Lorena grew up. Lorena says that she grew up very poor, but that her family was very happy. At a very young age, she took a liking to American entertainment. She loved American television.
I remember she said she watched the Flintstones in Venezuela, and even the Flintstones had a microwave, and they were just middle-class people, and that represented something to her.
At the age of 15, it's custom in a lot of Latin cultures to throw young women a quinceañera, but because Lorena's family was poor, they couldn't afford to throw her a lavish party, so she asked if she could take a trip to the United States instead, and they agreed. In 1986, at the age of 16, Lorena goes to the US for the first time, and she completely fell in love. She became determined on moving to the United States and following the American dream.
I always have this sensation that to come to America it's just like a big opportunity, that this is gonna be the beginning of something.
The American dream, baby. Gets you every time. So Lorena went home back to Venezuela after her trip to the United States, and she finished high school before deciding that she was going to move to the US on a student visa at the age of 18. She stayed with family friends that lived in Virginia, and she enrolled in the local community college. She didn't know any English when she moved here, so she started taking classes to learn English, and she says she also watched a lot of daytime television to pick up the language. Alright, so Lorena moves here in 1986. We're going to jog a little bit to 1988, where she's at the Marine Corps Ball and she meets John. It's not clear why or how Lorena got invited to the ball, or, you know, what she was really doing there, but she and John meet and they have instant chemistry. To Lorena, John was the epitome of an American man. Handsome, blonde, blue eyes, a Marine Corps, he had the uniform on. John was looking good, and Lorena was like, you know what? I need that in my American dream. I want some of that from my American dream. John describes Lorena as being very beautiful and semi-innocent. She was very sweet. She had a very cute accent. She didn't speak English that well, and he thought she was just really, really cute. So they really hit it off at the ball, and they start seeing each other afterwards. So after the ball, John and Lorena start dating. The family friends that Lorena had been staying with consisted of 2 daughters that were around her age, so they were all friends and they would hang out a lot. And they said that they did not like John from the moment they met him. They said he was kind of rude, he was very like macho, and he always made Lorena pay for everything. Lorena didn't see it that way though. She thought he was just forgetting his wallet, and she didn't take it too seriously, but her friends were like, I don't really like this guy. I mean, he's cute, but like, whatever. Lorena doesn't care. She's in love. So Lorena and John are both made aware that Lorena's visa is about to expire and she's going to have to go back to Venezuela. This is where their stories kind of differ, because John says that Lorena was crying and asking if John would marry her, and Lorena says that John proposed to her. He basically like gave her a ring that he had found one day when they were hanging out. I don't know. I don't know how it happened, but they ended up getting married. John's family was against the marriage because they thought that he was too young and that they were rushing and that they shouldn't get married under duress, which is understandable. And Lorena's family, who she was staying with, of course, they didn't like John, but her family in Venezuela thought it was amazing. Like, great, she's marrying an American man. She can stay in America. Amazing. Like, this is so good. So Lorena's thrilled. John is thrilled, I guess. They seemed really happy at their wedding. So on June 18th, 1989, John and Lorena officially got married. They said they had a very small, intimate wedding, and they looked really happy. John was 22 at the time of their marriage, and Lorena was 20. Lorena's family in the States described her as being very, very naive and very smitten with John. She was absolutely in love with him. That was her first relationship, and she was actually a virgin when they got married. Lorena says that while she and John were dating, there was never any indication of violence. He was always the perfect gentleman. However, after their wedding, his behavior began to change. A few weeks after the wedding, John, Lorena, and John's brother were all leaving a bar, and John was driving, Lorena was in the front seat, and his brother was in the back seat. And I guess John was driving recklessly, so Lorena said, "Stop, you're driving crazy, you're scaring me." And she tried to grab the steering wheel to make the car go straight because he was going in a zigzag, and she's like, "Stop, stop." She grabs the steering wheel, and he reaches over and punches her in the chest. Lorena says after he hit her, she was in shock and she began to cry because he hit her really hard, and she looked in the rearview mirror to see that his brother was in the back, like nodding like approval, like, "Yeah, good job hitting her." Just really weird. From that point on, the physical violence would continue to escalate throughout their relationship. John says that Lorena was also violent and that she would become really jealous and would hit him if he was like looking at other girls or if she got mad. And Lorena says that John would continue to physically abuse her. He would humiliate her in public. Lorena would be asked as to why she decided to stay with John after the first time he hit her. And she says it's because she was Catholic. She didn't believe in divorce. She also really loved John. He was her first love, her first relationship. So in the beginning, she always had hope that things would get better and that, it would stop. She also was fearful that if she divorced John, she would be sent back to Venezuela. The real troubles in their relationship started in 1991 when John was discharged from the Marines. He'd served his time, so he was let go. Since John was no longer a Marine, he no longer had a steady paycheck, and he tried his best to get a job, but he, for whatever reason, couldn't keep a steady job. So Lorena became the primary income earner in the household. Lorena worked as a nail technician at the local nail salon, and she also nannied for the owner of the nail salon, Jana Busetti. And Jana became like a mother figure for Lorena. She would often go to Jana to talk about her marital problems, her money problems, and Jana was very comforting and would offer her, a listening ear.
She said she loved him and she wanted her marriage to work, and she was going to do anything to try to make her marriage work.
John believed that Jana was a bad influence on Lorena because Jana was a successful businesswoman. She had a lot of money. She had a really nice car, a nice house, and this exposed Lorena to luxury things that they couldn't afford. John says that after Lorena started hanging out with Jana, she wanted to buy a house, she wanted to have a nice car, and these were all out of their price range, which, because John no longer had a job, they really couldn't afford.
We started off in the studio apartment which we could afford. We were young. We should have worked our way up, but no. She wanted more, more, more. She was stubborn. She was selfish. And she wanted things her way.
Now, the new problems with money only made their already volatile relationship even more volatile and aggressive. John felt like Lorena was selfish and obsessed with material things, and Lorena didn't like that John couldn't keep a job, he was spending a lot of money, and he was inviting people over to the house without telling her. Their relationship became even more physically violent. Both John and Lorena have witnesses to say that Lorena would hit John and John would hit Lorena and push Lorena. Lorena had a lot of people who testified on her behalf that she was the primary victim of domestic violence in the relationship. Lorena was also a very small, petite woman, and John was an ex-Marine who himself said he was in perfect physical condition. So it definitely wasn't equal. Even if they both were equally hitting each other, it wasn't equal. Come on. Come on, John. Both Lorena and John called the police on each other multiple times. Lorena says that John became increasingly more violent, and he even started becoming violent in the bedroom, sexually assaulting her. The local police force say that they visited John and Lorena's home at least half a dozen times. Of the many times that the police went to John and Lorena's house, only one time was John charged with battery and assault, but the charges were later dismissed after he agreed to go to counseling. Alright, so as if the couple didn't have enough trouble with the law, like the local police force were starting to know who they were, Lorena got into some legal trouble of her own, separate from John. Lorena was caught shoplifting from the local Nordstrom. She was taking dresses, and she says that she needed the dresses to look nicer for John to keep him from looking at other women. She says that John was constantly criticizing the things she wore and putting her down about her appearance, so she wanted to get nicer things, but they didn't have money to buy the nicer things. And then in October of 1991, Lorena was caught stealing money from her employer, Jana. Yes, the same Jana who was like a mother figure to her. She was stealing money from Jana. She stole over $7,000, and she says it's because she couldn't afford to keep up with her bills, and John didn't have a job, so they were falling behind on their mortgage payments. When Jana found out about it, because she understood Lorena's home life, she didn't fire her. She just made her pay back the money with interest. So that was kind of kind, because I would have been like, girl, you gonna steal from me? She's really sad. Jana's a good person. Later that same year, Lorena finds out that she is pregnant. She's thrilled. She's so excited. She tells John, and John is not excited. He says, there's no way we can have a baby. This is not the right time. We don't have any money. You have to get a shmushmortion. And Lorena is like, what? Why would I do that? I would never do that. I'm Catholic. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And he's like, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to leave you. And she's like, okay, well, I don't want to raise the baby by myself. And he's like, okay, good. You're going to have a shmushmortion. Lorena is in a point in her relationship where she thinks that things are going to get better. She thought that having a baby might make things better. And John says, no, if you have the baby, I'm going to leave you. So she doesn't want to raise the baby on her own. So she felt very pressured into getting the shmushmortion. And she does. John would later say that he and Lorena decided together that they were going to terminate the baby, but Lorena says that she never wanted to terminate the baby, and she was very regretful of it. And that was kind of like where she started to kind of unravel as a person. She just never was the same after that happened. In March of 1992, the couple's house was foreclosed on. John was still not able to keep a job. He was fired from everywhere that he worked. And Lorena was not able to keep up with the payments on their own, so their house was foreclosed. John and Lorena had to leave their house and move into a smaller apartment, and the physical violence between John and Lorena continued to increase. Lorena says that John began sexually assaulting her more and more often. Each time one of their fights escalated to physical violence, it would also end in sexual violence. Lorena says that sometimes the sexual violence would also include John forcibly having sex in the rear end as well. I don't know how to say that without oh God, not okay. Not okay. Lorena says she knew that what John was doing to her wasn't right, and she would tell him, like, you're raping me, and he'd be like, no, forced sex just turns me on. Like, it really turns me on. In 1992, there were not a lot of resources for victims of domestic violence. There wasn't even a lot of rhetoric around domestic violence and like what it actually entailed, and marital rape was just not a thing. Like, in the minds of so many people, that just wasn't a thing. If you were married, you had sex, it was fine. Like, it doesn't matter if you didn't want to have sex, you're married, so which is crazy. Lorena knew what John was doing to her wasn't right, but she didn't know who to talk to about it or even how to talk about it. Like, there just wasn't a lot of conversations being had about this kind of thing. It was also very shameful. I mean, it is still very shameful. Victims of domestic violence often keep it a secret because they're embarrassed or, ashamed. Lorena felt very embarrassed to talk about that, especially talk about the sexual violence, especially. So she didn't. She kept it a secret. So Lorena did stay with John because she wanted to work it out. A part of her really loved John and she wanted to work it out. She also didn't really have many options on places that she could go. There weren't really shelters or domestic hotlines back then. There was none of that. And even now with that, it's still very difficult for people to figure out what they're going to do in those situations. Like, everyone, please, like, if you have those comments where you're like, I would have did this, you don't know what you would have done. It's much more complex and complicated than I think most people understand. So Lorena stayed. I think a part of her still really wanted the relationship with John to work out, but their fights would become more and more physical, more and more sexually violent as well. The only option Lorena had when John got too physical was to call the police. However, she says that whenever the police came, John would completely change his demeanor and he would not be the angry, violent, aggressive person that he was. He was just like acting like she was crazy, basically. Lorena says that she did try to leave John a couple times. The couple did separate in 1992, but then they later reconciled and got back together. Lorena told John that she wanted to divorce him, but John would threaten to kill her if she divorced. He said that if you leave, I'm going to find you. Like, there's no way you're going to get away from me, or you're going to have to go back to Venezuela. So Lorena was very afraid. Lorena learned that if she could prove John was abusing her, then she could get a divorce that would not result in her having to leave. So she bought a tape recorder to record John being physically abusive or being verbally abusive in the hopes that she could, give it to the divorce lawyer. John found the tape recorder, however, and then physically abused Lorena and proceeded to sexually abuse her as well. In the spring of 1993, Lorena was becoming visibly disturbed. She was starting to show that everything was not okay. She was not okay. She began reaching out to neighbors and friends and telling them what was happening to her. And she talked to one of her neighbors who gave her a pamphlet about domestic violence and marital rape, which Lorena really appreciated because it validated what was happening to her. Lorena's boss, Jana, also said that she could see something was really wrong with Lorena. Lorena had been getting complaints at work, which never happened. Lorena was an amazing nail technician, and all of a sudden she was getting complaints. She could see that Lorena was visibly shaking and just off, like something was really wrong with her. She was a nervous wreck. She wasn't eating well. She wasn't communicating well. She was just all messed up. John says that during this time, he asked Lorena for a divorce. He says that he wasn't happy. She wasn't happy. They were fighting all the time, so he wanted to get a divorce. And he says Lorena objected. She did not want to get a divorce from him. I honestly, if you can't tell, I don't believe John. I really do try to be unbiased when I'm telling these stories, but this one is really hard for me because everything Lorena says, John kind of has a story that is the complete opposite of what Lorena says, but throughout the years, John's story changes a lot and Lorena's is pretty consistent, so I think John's but we'll continue. Let's continue. He claims that he was going to divorce Lorena and she was visibly upset and distraught because she did not want to get a divorce. He was also going to have her move out of the apartment that she was paying for. Anyways, he was going to have her move out of the apartment and move his friend in, and he says that she was very upset about that. So that's why she was upset, not because he was beating her and raping her. All right, so now we're getting closer and closer to the day that she snipped off the piece. She snipped off that part. You know what I'm saying? I'm not. Why would I celebrate that? That's weird. That's weird, Cydnee. Don't do that. So on June 21st, 1993, Lorena goes into the police station to file a protective order against her husband. She told John that she was going to move out and she wanted a protective order against him in case he tried to come after her.
We know that most women are killed either in the process of leaving their partner or in the 6 months directly afterwards. So that's a really volatile time and the reason why we have restraining orders so that women can be protected while they're trying to leave.
She goes in to ask for the protective order, and they tell her to come back the next day because it's going to take a couple hours to process. The secretary wasn't there, so she had to come back. She had already begun moving her things out of the apartment and putting them in her neighbor's apartment, but she was still sleeping in the apartment. So her stuff was gone. She was getting her stuff out, but she was still sleeping there.
Why did you stay in the apartment that night? Couldn't you have gone and stayed with Jana or Mrs. Castro or something like that?
No, I didn't want my friends to know that he was hitting me again.
The next day, June 22nd, 1993, Lorena woke up and went to work like she normally did. John was at home with his friend, Robert Johnson, who was supposed to be the guy who's going to move in with John after Lorena moved out, after he kicked Lorena out. So John and Robert decide that they're going to go out on the town. They want to go out, have a good time, so they do. They go out to DC and drink and do whatever they were going to do. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know. When Lorena comes home from work, she finds that the apartment is empty and no one is there. She continues to move stuff out of the apartment, but she's still sleeping there. So she falls asleep, and at 3 a.m., John and Robert return home, and she wakes up because John slammed the door shut when he got in the house. Now, John says later in interviews that he was not drunk that night. He says that he didn't drink that much because he was driving, so he didn't want to drive drunk.
We weren't drunk because we didn't want to drive drunk.
His friend Robert, however, says that they were both hammered. His friend Robert says they were so drunk. Robert's like, yeah, we were toasted. John's like, no, I wasn't that drunk. Like, okay, John, sure. Sure, John. Sure. Lorena says that John came in the room and he was obviously drunk and he began forcibly trying to have sex with her. Lorena says that she tried really hard to fight John off, but of course he was much stronger than her, much bigger than her, and he had held her down just like he'd done many, many times before and forced himself on her, in her. Ooh, ooh. After John had finished, Lorena began shouting and screaming at him that he hurt her and that this wasn't right, and John said, I don't care, and he just turned over and went to sleep. His story was that he was drunk and really tired, and she was yelling and complaining at him, and he didn't know what she was upset about, so he just fell asleep, even though earlier he said he wasn't that drunk. Okay, John. So Lorena is very upset. It's still like 3 or 4 in the morning right now, and she goes into the kitchen to get a glass of water to calm herself down. And she says while she was in the kitchen, she noticed the knife sitting on the kitchen counter, and she just began to get enraged with thinking about all the times that John was physically abusive to her, sexually abusive to her, and she says she blacked out and went in the bedroom and snip, snip. Lorena says that she doesn't have really any recollection of actually committing the castration. The next thing she says she remembers was driving in the car, holding the knife in one hand and holding the sausage in the other hand, and she comes to and realizes and then freaks out and throws the sausage out of the window into a field. I hate calling it the sausage. Ah! After Lorena woke up and realized what she'd done, she disposed of the knife. She threw the knife in a nearby trash bin, and then she went to Jana's house, her boss. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, John wakes up because he feels a pool of liquid around him, and he wakes up to find that he is bleeding profusely. He says he didn't understand what had happened. It took him a minute to realize what had happened, and once he realized that his private parts were gone, he gets up to go and wake up his friend Robert and tells him to take him to the hospital. Sorry, this is not funny. I just imagine Robert, like, still drunk, being like, what? Wait, now what's going on now? So his friend wakes up and he's panicking. He's like, oh my God. They rush to the hospital. And John, surprisingly, is pretty calm throughout the entire thing. When they get to the hospital, John is covered in blood, and the doctors immediately ask to see his wrist because they thought that he cut his wrist. And he says, no. And he, like, points down, and they're like, what? So they take him into the back room to see what they're talking about. And he says that when he revealed what had happened, he was just covering himself with a sheet. So when he pulled the sheet up and they saw that his wanker was gone, the doctors were shocked because they had never actually seen that before. Like, no one had ever seen that or heard of that actually happening, which is actually kind of interesting, right? Like, was that the first time that it happened in modern history, or like the first time like people knew about it? I don't know. All right, so back at Jana's house, Lorena tells Jana what happened, what she'd done, and Jana's like, okay, we need to call the police. So they call the police, and the police are like, what? You said now what now? No one really knows or understands how to take this information or like what to do with it. But the police are like, okay, well, do you know where it is or where you dropped it at? And Lorena's like, yeah, I dropped it here. And she tells them, you know, where it is. Surprisingly, the police are able to go to the field where Lorena says she threw it out the window, and they search the field and find John's severed sausage. They grab the sausage, they go to a nearby 7-Eleven, and they put the sausage in a hot dog container with ice and transport it to the hospital where they know John is waiting without it. So they transport the sausage in the hot dog container on ice to the hospital to John. Also surprising, Lorena cut the penis very perfectly. Like it was like a perfect cut. There was no bumps, there was nothing. Like it was perfect. It was like a surgical cut. So John was going to be able to reattach his penis to his body. I don't know if he should have though. Dr. David Berman then begins surgery on John to reattach his penis, and even though he'd never done this surgery before, he'd never even seen this happen before, he said it was a pretty simple like nerve ending surgery. Like he just had to reattach the nerves. Either way, it worked, and John had his penis back. All right, so at this point, the media had gotten wind of this story, and it became a circus. Everyone wanted to know more. Everyone wanted to know what happened. Once the media got hold of this story, it was a national news story. It became every major publication's news story. Everyone wanted to know more. It was shocking. It still is shocking. Fascinating. This is a fascinating story. Lorena was, of course, arrested, and she confessed at what she'd done. She also explained why she did it. So then John was interrogated. So he's still at the hospital at this point, recovering from his penis surgery. And the investigators asked him, you know, did you forcibly have sex with your wife last night? Did you rape your wife last night? And he says, no, I didn't have sex with her. I fell asleep. I was too tired. But they had DNA from his penis, and they were like, well, then why is Lorena's DNA on your penis if you guys didn't have sex? And he goes, oh, well, sometimes when I'm sleeping, I do things when I'm sleeping. So I didn't know. I don't know. If we had sex, I don't know. I was sleeping.
Did you or did you not have sex with her that night?
No, I don't really know, sir, if I did or not.
Okay, John, sure, John. After the story becomes a national news media frenzy, everyone knows about it, John and Lorena both faced charges and had to have a trial. John was charged with sexual assault, and Lorena was charged with cutting off John's sexual assault weapon. John had his trial first, and he was acquitted. He claimed that Lorena was just jealous, and she did it because he was going to divorce her, and she was always this very violent, volatile person. And the jury believed him. He got off. And to this day, he still maintains that he never physically or sexually assaulted Lorena. He says that the couple did get into fights, but it was always both of them fighting each other. During Lorena's trial, she was also found not guilty. Well, she was found guilty by reason of insanity. I don't know the correct way to say that. I don't know if it's guilty by reason of insanity or not guilty by reason of insanity. It might be not guilty by reason of insanity. But either way, the jury decided that Lorena was pushed to the point of committing the act that she did due to battered women syndrome. So Lorena did not receive any jail time, but she was committed to a mental institution so that she could have a mental evaluation. Lorena served 25 days in the mental institution, and then she was released in 1994, and she filed for divorce. Gotta get that divorce. Also in 1994, John decided that he was going to appear in an adult film to, quote, show that his penis worked. The same year, he was arrested and charged with assault and battery of his new girlfriend, and he served 12 days in jail. In 1997, a couple years later, Lorena was also arrested and charged with assault of her mother. Someone claimed that she had hit her mother, but the charges were dropped, even though there was a witness saying that she did hit her mom. I don't know. John is also arrested 3 more times for assaulting 3 different women. So, all right, you guys, that is it for this story. After Lorena got off, after she wasn't charged with anything, men were terrified that, you know, this kind of thing could happen. Women were like, yeah, like there were a lot of women who were really, really in support of Lorena. I have to admit that I was a little bit in support of Lorena. I want to apologize if I came off a bit biased in this video. I do my best to try and be as unbiased when I'm telling these stories, but this one was just really hard it was hard to watch and sit through and just look at John lying. It's the will of the universe that his penis worked again, but I kind of wish that it didn't. I think it's very telling that John was arrested multiple times for assaulting other women, even though he claims that he never did it to Lorena ever, and that Lorena was crazy. Lorena assaulting her mom was indicative of the fact that maybe she was also kind of violent, you know? And maybe she was. I think they both probably did things they shouldn't have done in their relationship. They both probably should not have been together to begin with, but I'm not here to judge any of that. I just think this story is absolutely fascinating. I'm also going to link some domestic violence resources down in the description box below. If you guys have some of those, please be sure to leave those in the comments as well so that we can, you know, spread awareness. I think a lot of times in these situations, they are very complex and complicated, but sometimes people don't even have the awareness as to what's happening, and they won't know unless, you know, there's somewhere that they can go or people that they can talk to about it. So please leave some domestic violence resources down below if you have them. All right, you guys, that is the end of this video and all that I have for you. If you've made it to this point, please watch some other videos or subscribe. Let's be friends. Give this video a thumbs up. It helps me out so much, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye. Bye. Goodbye.